Greetings, everyone. Thank you and welcome again to another episode of Let's Talk Family. Let's Talk Family is a bi weekly show that I do to talk about issues within the family. We come here and we talk as a family about the family. For the month of February, I dedicate, normally it's a bi weekly show, but in the month of February, I do it every Saturday 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. And the issues are focused around issues within the African American community. So today we will start off with one of the issues that I am very passionate about. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that I want to talk about. The interesting thing is, this is part two. Last year for Black History Month, I did the first show on the traffic stop, and I had a lawyer on. And those that were here last year may remember Franz Chavans. He's also been a guest a few times on a few things that I've done, but we did the traffic stop from a lawyer's perspective. Well, based on the conversation that him and I had, and based on um, the outcome, I decided that I want to bring in a correctional officer, a law enforcement and personnel, and talk about it from a law enforcement's a law enforcement protect. Oh man, what is really going on? I'm having trouble. So you know what? Instead of saying that, I'm just going to bring on our guest. So everybody, and Let's Talk Family. Before I bring them on, of course, feel free to comment throughout the show. Feel free to share. Feel free to like. All right. So go ahead, take your time, like, comment, and share. All right. Now let's talk family. Let's welcome Bryan Lewis, actually a very good friend of mine. How are you, Bryan?
Doing well. How are you?
Man, I tell you what, I am doing fabulous. I am doing great. Man, I thank you for accepting the invite, and we look forward to your knowledge that you will share with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, take a few minutes and introduce yourself. Tell the viewers who you are.
All right. My name is Bryan Lewis, and I am a native of Okaloosa County, Crestview, Florida. I've been in law enforcement. Well, I was in law enforcement for close to 15 years, and I've done several things within law enforcement. I'm married to my wife, Lauren Lewis. She actually just stepped in, and we have three children: Brian, Brielle, and Bella. So I have two girls and one boy, and I'm currently the director of maintenance at the Crestview Housing Authority. I still have a passion for law enforcement, and Mr. Feaster, I just appreciate you for letting me come on and give my small perspective on the issue.
Now he say small perspective, but y'all about to see this man is gonna endow us with some knowledge and some information on this.
Putting pressure on me.
Of course, I got to. No, you good, you good. So look, before we jump into this, I just want everybody to know what birthed this show. Like I said, this is part two. Last year we did part one from a lawyer's perspective, and the reason why I wanted to do this show is based on my lack of knowledge at the traffic stop. Okay, like if you listen to this person and that person and this person and that person, you get different perspectives. You get different things. You're told, only don't talk to the cop. You're told only answer the question directly. You're told, watch how you talk to the cop. You're told, wait till you get to a lighter area to pull over. You can, all this stuff. And granted, we understand that we may not get the actual answer because every traffic stop is different. But there are some things that we should know. For example, let's start, Bryan, with talking about what are my rights at a traffic stop. All right. So when I get pulled over, what are my rights?
So you're still when any kind of traffic stop, and they taught us in school to where we would never use the word routine, even though we may have a mindset. You may see something on TV and you think, well, just because the person runs from the police officer on TV, then you have that right, in real life, or because the officer may get a little violent in TV, or something that we know for sure. We have plenty of cases over the last 5 years to where traffic stops can go good, they can go bad. We have all these different things that we can reference, but what our right is and what our right continues to be is we have to, whether our opinions are what they are, we have to abide by the law. And that traffic stop, when done in a legal manner, is a temporary detention. So although you still have rights, you're still within your rights to express yourself peacefully. When the lights come on, the sirens come on, whatever tool that this officer, male or female, used to conduct the traffic stop, um, you still have to comply. You're a free citizen. This is America, but that particular instrument that the law has deemed necessary to seize people, that is a temporary seizure, and without being put in handcuffs. Those lights are a temporary detention for that moment.
Now, you said something I have never heard before: temporary detention. I have never heard that before. And that honestly changes the perspective on what I think of as a traffic stop. So what exactly is a temporary detention?
Well, and the reason I use that is because you could get pulled over for several different things. There's
Mhm.
traffic violations, and we have to break this down. That although incidents, and it's very real, and it's caused real trauma that has made people kind of fearful of being pulled over or encountered by the police, whether you're walking or riding in a vehicle, but particularly when you're in a vehicle, it's our mindset that that vehicle is our domain, that's our castle, that's our place, our mobile home, if you will. And when that is being interrupted, it shows a lot of emotions. But what it is if we can put our mind around it, is that this is a temporary situation. If all goes well,
Right.
your license are legit, your insurance and those kind of things, the officer only has a reasonable, and the statute actually says a reasonable time. So depending on what type of investigation is, if it's a faulty equipment, if it's you violated some kind of traffic control device,
Right.
we can't keep you on the side of the road for a length of time that's not reasonable for us to do our job. So you can interpret that what it is. If there's different case law that allow, if they're waiting on a canine, if they're waiting on backup, all those things may stretch that reasonable time, but it can't be a 30 or 40 minute, and the officer came and got your license, went back to the car, and you hadn't seen him anymore. That's unreasonable.
Right.
But it is a detention, and it is meant to be temporary. So there's no specific time for per statute that we have, but the verbiage is temporary detention.
It's interesting that you said reasonable time, because that's exactly the phrase the lawyer used last year. And that gives another perspective on how, because you answered the question: how long is the traffic stop? Well, the traffic stop is as long as the traffic stop needs to be,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So now, when we're talking about, now, there's a lot of confusion on what to say at the traffic stop, like what information and how do you talk to the police officer during the traffic stop.
Right. And I'm actually, when you were introducing what this show was going to be about, in my 15 plus years of law enforcement, I've been on both sides of the table, and especially in a African American home, you would think that the stories that you hear is, um, you know, it, you're going to get hurt when you're getting pulled over, or you don't have to comply, or don't tell them. Especially from a lawyer's perspective, they're going to tell you, do not answer the questions, don't say it. From a law enforcement perspective, my opinion, and I may be crucified for it, but I've always told folks, even when I was supervising some men and women on the shift there, is that I would always tell people when we have these phone in complaints, and like I said, people may disagree, but I would 100% of the time say comply and then complain later. So if you comply with their request, and it's up to us to know a little bit about what our laws here in Florida or whatever state that you are in, um, you're supposed to know those in at least enough to where it's just like your job or our jobs. We know our policies to make sure we don't violate them and to make sure we're not being violated. So we have to take, even though we may not be lawyers or police officers, we're citizens. And so it's up to us to kind of take a little bit of initiative and learn enough about the statutes to where we can make sure that we are in compliance. And the
Yeah.
reason I say that is if you remember, I think it was Dante Wright, the officer that pulled him over. She was just recently found guilty. She was the female that meant to tase him and pulled her service weapon and shot him.
Right.
Well, in Minnesota, I think is where it was, or somewhere up there. What happened was in that particular state, it's illegal to have anything hanging from your rear view mirror. So they pulled him over for having air freshener from his rear view mirror and an expired tag. So I'm saying all that to say, as individuals, we have to know where we are, and we have to know that we are well within our rights, because it's just like any other profession, Walmart, whatever. There's bad seeds anywhere, but I think
Yeah.
if our mindset is set to this traffic stop was designed to be a tool, and it could be broken just like any other tool, but it should be for deterrent. It should be to save lives, and then there is something called a pretext stop that helps law enforcement professionals. Meaning, if you are in an area and you have a broken tail light, and I pull you over for a broken tail light, this officer is well within his or her rights if they feel like, well, there's something else going on, whether it's drugs or some stolen property, that they have a preconceived notion
Mhm.
that there could be something else going on. And I think that that's what starts changing attitudes,
Right.
and especially as drivers, we can sense it. All right, you telling me that you're pulling me over for a broken tail light, but now you're asking me if I have anything else in my vehicle. This
Right.
officer is operating on a reasonable time frame, right? And if he or she is not the professional that we sometimes run into, they take these tools and they take these rules, and it's broken or stretched to a point to where we could find ourselves on a to where the law is being used to manipulate us and not help us. But I
Right.
still say, and I'm raising small children, I want them to arrive alive. I
Right.
want them to come home alive. I'm still going to say, I'm going to train my kids to comply, get all the information, and then complain later, because tensions are already high.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's and again, you didn't watch the show from last year, part one, but you're saying the same thing he said. He was like, he didn't say it like you're saying, comply and complain later, but he did say, do whatever you can to get out of that situation. Try not to be disruptive, try not to be um, belligerent, try not to be all these things and cause more attention. Because now, correct me if I'm wrong, the more you say, then the more that can be used. The longer you talk, then and I'm not trying to say that you're trying to pick at what we're saying, but if my like I'm example, I substitute at high school,
sure.
and one of the things that I always say is if you let a teenager talk, they will tell you anything.
Right.
If you just let them talk, they will tell you anything. So it's kind of like that at the traffic stop. And like I said, if I'm wrong, correct me. The more you talk, the more information you give, the more that you are giving information that could be used if something is wrong.
Sure, yes, sir. That is a perspective and so the traffic stop is so vague in the sense of
Right,
we're pulling people over for running a stop sign or red light, and we're pulling people over for no tag lights or
right,
too much tint on the window. That is really about the presentation and the intent from the officer. To where if you're the driver, you're setting the tone as far as where you stop, because we know that if it's dark and it's someone that doesn't feel so safe, they may put on their flashers, call the dispatch center and say, hey, I'm not, these are just little tools, I'm not running, but I'm trying to find me a spot that I can feel safe in. You know, those are
Right.
ways. But really, the officer, although we don't know from what's in one vehicle from the next, there's no adrenaline, even though officers out of ignorance carry themselves as robots. True, it is it's an officer safety concern when you're walking up on a vehicle, whether it's daylight or dark outside. Because
Mm.
although we may say, "Hey, we're going to pull you over because you ran that red light," this person may have just robbed somebody, may have just hurt
Right.
somebody. You know what I mean? And there's
Right.
no way that the officer knew that, but the driver knows. So
Right.
we may have an idea as law enforcement what our intents are to pull you over, and that's why I say presentation is key from our standpoint. In order to kind of calm the driver down, it's all about the assurance, and all that stuff can be manipulated at any moment because you can go up and trying to be professional and someone hurts you, shoot you. The driver can be so nervous to where
Right.
that's taken as a sign of aggression, and then the officer's trigger happy. So it is a I'm glad that you're talking about these things. That the officers will not talk about it. You're kind of trained to just deal with it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, these officers have families. The majority of them, they're people, they're men, they're women. I've worked with all kind of different types of people in my career, but I
Right.
can't say for the vast majority of the people that I've worked with and people that worked for me in the past that we're people first. You know,
Right.
so, but then another incident was just brought to my mind after I had retired from the police department. Of course, I started working for myself. I was probably about 2 months afterwards. I got reminded I'm just a regular brother at this point. I was pulled over. I
Wow.
mean, over the hundreds of people that I had pulled over in my career, I was pulled over, and then now I was nervous. I mean, armpit sweating. The officer, it was a sheriff's deputy actually. He pulled me over, said was traveling too fast. I was in the middle of a conversation, didn't have a clue, and I'm just trying to paint a picture of how we have these emotions.
Right.
And legit, I was in my wife's vehicle, and I told him, "Sir, I need a." He asked me for my license and insurance. I said, "Okay, sir, I need to open my door to lean out. I'm a big guy to get my wallet." And so as soon as I leaned out and leaned over like this, he pulled his gun,
Right.
literally pulled his
Yeah.
gun, and I guess he thought I was reaching, even though I told him what I was doing. Got his permission. So immediately I told him, I had already told, he had his body camera on and this, that, and another. I called the dispatch center on the side of the road, asked to speak to a supervisor, told him what had just happened. They patched me through to a supervisor. And I got a call a week or so later that that officer was not there anymore. He had been doing that. So
Oh,
we have to
wow.
complain. We have to pay attention because, like I said, man, that was my career, and that happened to me.
Yeah.
There was nothing exaggerated about that story. That was a real live. It really happened to me, and I was very nervous. So I understand both sides of it.
It. Listen, for my viewers that don't know Bryan Lewis, he is not a small guy. All right, this is a big country fed boy right here we're talking to. All right. And one of the fears I have is what you just said. And I talked to my son, who is a big boy also. And one of the fears that I have as he's about to get his license is because you're big, you're going to do things different than me being a lot smaller and the car is designed for me. So you're going to maneuver a lot different. And that's going to draw certain attention to you that you need to be mindful of, and my prayer is that he comes home every day, that he's going to get pulled over at least once in his life, and my prayer is that he comes home regardless if he's shook or not, that he comes home. And last year, Fran said same thing you said, that the cops they're people too, and they want to get home to their family too. And so when they walk up, they're dealing with the media, they're dealing with society. And if there's a case that's recent and popping, they're dealing with stigma, And I was told years ago that domestic violence, going into a home, was the most dangerous. But I'm thinking If it's the most dangerous, then the traffic stop has got to be right next to it,
Sure.
because in both of those situations, you have no idea what you're walking into.
Right.
You
Because
have no
you
idea.
have to remember on the traffic stop, the driver's focus
Hmm.
is on them, their vehicle, if they have children or family in the vehicle at the time. That
Right.
officer has to have his or her head on a swivel, because other vehicles, onlookers, we see it all the time. They, we have to make sure you're safe, make sure nobody hits you, make sure nobody hits us, or the threat may not be directly in that vehicle. It could be somebody else, having a bad day. And the law enforcement is and military and things of those natures are very, very um, difficult careers to be in already,
Mhm.
and the media makes that a little bit more hard,
Yeah.
because before you know it, we'll have a preconceived notion of how we think it's going to be. Going back to Mr. Wright's case, his mother said he had a fear that how he passed away, he was going to pass away prior to it happening. There was trauma
Wow.
there already. So I think where we miss it as law enforcement professionals, we'll come across so professional, so as a matter of fact, to where we have to really kind of cater to the individual, because people have they have thoughts that may not make any sense to us, but they're reality. You know.
Yeah. Right. Hmm. So we have a question, and I kind of like this question because this is something that I want to know also. I'm gonna call this one of the myths at the traffic stop, and you briefly touched about it, but I want to bring the question up. And it says, are drivers actually allowed to continue to a well-lit area before stopping, or is that dependent upon the jurisdiction and its laws? I'm gonna tell you what I was told and what I have told my son. If you're in a area that's not well lit, I told him, like you just said, put your flashers on and call the dispatch center and let them know where you are and what's going on. And my thought process is they would get in contact with the officers that's following me, so they'll know that I'm not resisting. I'm just trying to get to a well lit area.
Right. And I think that is, well, I know that that's the best way to handle that. We talk about adrenaline. If I'm behind you and I'm the officer, I'm making sure that you're not throwing stuff evidence out the window. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right, right,
Hey, this is the real fear that's going on. Some people take advantage of it, but in real life, um, we have to do that because we see it all the time. People use vehicles and they put lights on it. They're not the police. They're trying to hurt people. So that I believe, no matter what state you're in, that is a great practice. To where if you already have some trauma, some fear there, call the dispatch center, give them your location. That's going to do a couple different things. Make sure that it's really a cop, right?
oh yeah, that's a good point.
The dispatchers will have that information. If they don't have an officer trying to make a traffic stop, then they need to get you some help there very quick.
Right, yeah,
So communication is definitely the way to be. Once you start feeling that way, if you start feeling like, hey, there's not enough light out here, you call them, you give them your information, give them your vehicle description, and we're not taught this. It's always good to know what direction you're traveling, north,
right,
south, east, or west. So
yeah,
give them all that information because they need to know it for many different reasons.
yeah. So what? All right, so I'm from the country. Okay, I'm from the country, where there's not really a whole lot of street lights, and there is distance between cities. So if you're or towns, so if you're in one small town traveling to another small town, you may not get to a well lit area for 10, 15, 20, 30 miles. Is that a reasonable amount of time to be waiting on a well lit area? Or like in one of the like one of the locations that I'm thinking about between towns where I grew up at, there's an old abandoned building that's, last time I went home and saw it, it was lit up, but I may not feel comfortable stopping there on a backcountry road, abandoned building that's lit up. So um what do I do there, or is it still just, like you said, communicate with the dispatcher?
Right. So I think that communication is going to go a couple of different ways. and we're just hypothetically speaking, if there's
Mhm.
one car pulling over one vehicle, there's a little bit of concern there, right? Hey, I don't know if this is a real officer. I don't know. It's just me and one person. They're the dispatchers or the supervisor, the road supervisor. If I'm the supervisor that night with that scenario that you just said,
Mhm.
my intention is going to be let me send another car to ease this driver's fear. Now it's two
Wait a
off.
minute. Hold on, Brian. Hold on. I'm already nervous with one cop, and now you telling me they finna send another cop on this dark
Hey,
road?
look, it sounds weird, but I can't have you going 30, 40 miles to look for light. You know,
Right.
that's gonna create another issue that
Right.
I just don't see that working well for anybody. So I
Right.
think we have to I think we have to trust this is going to be one of those areas that we have to trust the system in both of
Right.
us if we're in that position. We hope that that don't happen, but I just know reasonably if you're going 30 or 40 miles, you're talking about some. I mean, these guys are really going to be a little bit aggravated to the sense of
Right.
where you're going to be nervous, they're going to be
Yeah.
aggravated. That's going to cause some issues, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. See, it goes back to every traffic stop is different.
It's not the
You
same,
know, if there is like I said, there's no routine, there is no
right?
standard. It- man, there's so many other questions I want to ask, but because there's so many different variables. But like I said at the beginning of the show, I know I'm not going to get all the answers, but if we can just get a better understanding of what we're dealing with, that helps out. So let's talk about resisting arrest.
Okay.
That is, to me, that is a blanket term that is used that many people, that I believe the average citizen really does not understand what resisting arrest is. So give us a basic understanding of what is a citizen, not citizen. Did I say citizen arrest?
No, you said resistance.
Okay, resisting arrest. Okay, yes.
So in Florida, and I can only speak of Florida. In Florida, you have a resistant arrest with violence, meaning you're actively, physically causing some kind of resistance against the authority, or you have a resistance without violence, which is a misdemeanor. So we deal with misdemeanors, felonies, citations, civil issues of that nature. But for this particular question, you're either going to have a felony or a misdemeanor. So let's just say that it's a resistant, and I think so. We know once you're physical, that pretty much that's a felony. We
Right.
understand that. But here's what most people may not know, and this is what's good to know. Resistant arrest without violence is just a simple obstruction. You know, you're given and it's one of those tools that's probably misused, if I would be honest. But it is a tool that's used for compliance. I mean, if you're given a legal command, from a law enforcement officer, and you refuse to do so, and I would like to think that it's got to be some kind of refusal over time. It's not just hey leave and you don't leave. That this thing is really kind of is meant to be kind of drawn out, and you just refuse, and your last um, ditch effort to gain some kind of control or compliance is now you're being arrested for a misdemeanor for resisting arrest. Well, then you're like, well, I didn't resist, I didn't pull away, I didn't fight, um, but you didn't comply, and that's where it gets a little bit, like I said, the little bit of gray area, because when we hear resisting, we're like, well, I didn't pull away, I did not fight, but you did
Right.
not
Right.
comply. There was some type of obstruction of justice that you committed, and that um, that's what gets a lot of people kind of in trouble, and honestly, um, I have seen that probably thrown out more out of court cases more, just because it is such it's one of those statutes that the elements are so hard to prove any kind of intent, malicious intent,
Right.
so I don't know if that really answers your question, but you really have to kind of be you have to be careful there, because you can resist verbally, if that makes sense. You
Wow.
don't
Okay.
have to you don't have to physically be any kind of resistance there. You can resist verbally and and as a result be arrested for a misdemeanor in Florida for
Wow.
resisting.
Hmm. So let's talk about the being told why I'm being pulled over. That's another area that I see that there's some confusion in. I've heard you can ask why are you being pulled over, and the cop has to tell you. I've heard you can't ask, or and I've heard that the police officer does not have to tell you. Um, I've heard that I've seen people drive away or walk away because they were not told why they were being questioned or why they were asked for their ID or stuff like that.
Right. So here's actually what would be a good follow up for your resisting question. You're being pulled over for a let's just make it simple, a broken tail light.
Hmm.
And as an officer, I walk up to your vehicle, I introduce myself, and I tell you why I'm pulling you over. Right. This is where this turns into a resisting real quick. You refuse to give me your evidence, refuse to comply, I can arrest you for resisting. And what you were pulled over for was an equipment violation. See what I'm saying?
Right.
That's 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 one of the tools. That's one of the things that could happen. Is it just? Is it? We really don't want it to go there, but I've seen it happen more than once.
Right.
But as far as a order of how we approach the vehicle, I actually, after 12, 12 years of being at the 12 or 13 years being at the police department, and then I had almost 3 years at the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office had a regimen, if you will, a routine. And like I said, I had been a sergeant, had been over narcotics, over patrol, those kind of things. And they were so structured, which they were an accredited agency, and they're very professional in a sense that when you went to a vehicle, literally they told you what to say, how to say it.
Hmm.
And one of those things is introducing yourself, so and so. Here's why I pulled you over, and then request. I agree with that. Coming from, even though it's not in statute how you have to do it.
Hmm.
If our law enforcement professionals, because that's what they are, realize that this is a service that you're presenting. I like that idea. I think on the receiving end, just like you, once I know who I'm talking to and I understand what you're doing and what you need from me, it makes it go a little bit smoother. Now,
Right.
here's the argument on the other side, and I hope that answers your question, that there is no black and white how you have to do it. Um, but on the argument on the other side is that if I'm an officer and I walk up to the car and I'm telling you why I pull you over, I'm giving you an option to, if you're there for evil reasons, for evil and not good, now I'm giving you an opportunity to combat, and you didn't take control of the situation very quickly. I think that mindset comes from a officer or officers that have a us versus them mentality. This is
Right.
already going to go bad, so now I have to. And there's certain things, if you're watching some kind of house or area, and you know that this could be a violent deal, you may want to go in a little bit aggressive. If I pull you over and I see your bow tie, I need to be a little bit more, you know, I don't have to be as threatened. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that that's probably where we go. It's that robot mentality again. Is that where we get into this stuff? We have to be able to turn it on and off. I think our cop sense will kind of tell us when a little bit of danger. A lot of times where sometimes I guess you can kind of be ambushed, but for the day to day operations, not the routine, because it's nothing's routine, but
Right.
the operations of the day. I think if you can, because of what's happened in America, go up to these vehicles, introduce yourself as officers. If we do have an officer listening, introduce yourself and tell the driver why you're doing what you're doing. You're going to get a much more compliant person, because most of the time, I think most
Right.
people will understand that.
So I know you're talking from a Florida's perspective. So in the state of Florida, and I think you already answered this question, but I'm gonna ask it again. Is it is it protocol or is it regulation to tell me why you're pulling me over, or is that courtesy?
I'm gonna have to lean more towards courtesy, professional courtesy, just because I have not seen it in a statute book or,
Right,
like I said, that is the practice of the sheriff's office.
right,
Really, that was the first time that I had kind of encountered that. I had a routine to where I would tell them, "Hey, here." On most cases, I'm I'm Sergeant Lewis, Crestview Police Department, especially if it was someone that I didn't know. Luckily, working in a town, I knew a lot of folks,
right.
so we didn't run into that. But you have to kind of adapt to where you are. So I have
Mm.
not seen any kind of case law on that. I've been out of law enforcement, the daily stuff for about 4 years now. Or no, I'm sorry, no, I hadn't been out for about 2 years actually.
Right,
I
right,
worked. I forgot about the school. I was a school
right.
resource officer for about 2 years. So, but either which way, I don't think that it is a rule that's set in stone that you have to do that.
So from your personal perspective, from your personal opinion, do you think that it is better for the police officer to explain why they're pulling over up front or withhold that information?
I think for now, in the time that we're living in, I think it's better. But at the same time, I think it depends on the situation.
Right,
You got to think about if it's if you're outnumbered, if there's a lot of folks in that vehicle, I want to get the information I can, identify the people that's in the vehicle very quickly, and it may be a good idea for me to kind of retreat from that vehicle if there's more than one. And I'm just thinking of years of why I've pulled people over and different
right.
things going on. There may be reasons that you don't do that every time that way, but I think for the most times you should introduce yourself and tell the person why you're pulling them over, because this, like I said, we go back to it is a seizure. I'm seizing your time. It's a detention, if you will. So just like anything else, before you put handcuffs on somebody, you're going to tell them, why are
Right.
why are you putting handcuffs on them. I think when appropriate, you need to tell them why you're pulling them over.
So from your experience, are you more comfortable when there's one person in the car or multiple people in the car?
I'm more comfortable when it's one person in the car and I can see through the vehicle. That's another
Right.
thing. If I can add this in,
And that's why I asked the
we
question
have
because
we
I
have
know that, yeah.
we have dark tinted windows on our vehicle. A
Right.
lot of it comes from the factory. These are just tips so we can go home at night. Make sure it may not be anything to you, but to kind of ease that officer, because I don't care how many years, going back to the Dante Wright thing, that lady had 26 years of experience and
Hmm.
she made a fatal mistake. I mean, it was horrible. She pulled a gun thinking it was a taser with 26 years of experience.
Right.
We don't know what the officer's been through. We have some sympathy for these officers. There are bad officers. I'd like to think that those bad officers are weeded out constantly by good officers standing up. That's just, I have a childhood dream of always wanting to be a cop. So I'm not a cop hater. I love cops, that do the right thing. So I think that when there's one person in the vehicle, I'm definitely more at ease. But when there's multiple people in the vehicle, because I've pulled people over who had just robbed a house, pulled them over on the interstate. We knew that they were going towards Pensacola, and we pulled them over, and they had guns in there. Like I said,
Mm.
at that time I had one kid.
Right.
I have a wife. I want to get home. Every decision that we make is to try to make it home safe. So if you can take your windows down, roll your windows down, anything that you can do, turn your music down,
Mhm.
and try to be as nice as you can to make this reasonable time as
Right.
as shortened as we can. Yeah.
So you open the door to another can that I'm trying not to
Well,
go in
just go there.
well, I got like 15 different avenues that I'm thinking about. So I'm trying to narrow it down to one, maybe two, because I'm gonna be honest, in my mindset, because majority of the times I'm traveling by myself, I was thinking about the traffic stop. Even last year, I was thinking about the traffic stop from a perspective of one person in the vehicle. But now that you've talked about multiple people in the vehicle, that's a whole different perspective. So now we're dealing with a traffic stop where there's multiple people in the vehicle who should be in compliance. And the reason why I asked that question,
It's a good
I
one.
struck a nerve. The reason why I asked that question is you're talking to the driver, but one of the passengers is belligerent. So what? How does that scenario go?
That's a good one. So, if you remember back, I guess I'm gonna say 5 years or less. If the front seat passenger, first off, not wearing a seatbelt didn't always wasn't always a reason to get pulled over. A primary reason. It was a secondary reason, but it wasn't always a primary reason. So the argument has always been and man, I don't like it, but it's true. The argument has always been if you're the passenger of the vehicle, you're not detained because you're not driving that vehicle.
Right.
Therefore, the passenger has always had
Leeway.
yes, the freedom to leave that traffic stop. Right
Wow. Yeah.
now, um, because you can pull people over for seatbelts. If that passenger does not have a seatbelt on, that is a legal reason to detain that passenger. Right now, let's fast forward. Say that passenger says, "Hey, I'm gonna stay in the car, but I don't want to give you my identification because you didn't pull me over."
Right.
Here's where it is, man. Swallowing some cop pride. There is nothing in the world we can do to make that passenger give us their information.
Oh wow.
Now, here's where my comply and complain later comes from. If I'm asking you that as an officer, I just want to make sure that I'm not dealing with somebody that's wanted or somebody that's going to hurt me. So I I love it when people just comply, let us do our thing. But that is a I hope I answered your question because that the legal approach to it is if you're a passenger and the officer requests the identification from you, you do not have to give that.
So let's go back to the second part of the question that I asked. What if the passenger is in the seatbelt but belligerent, like just like the driver's being as courteous and as nice and then compliant, but the passenger is, F the police, or why are you talking to him, or you don't have to give him your identification. Like, the passenger is the one that's causing all this disruption.
Again, it makes my skin tingle on it, but the true deal is that that's one of those things that we just have to take as professionals. We have to take. I think before video cameras, I
Hmm.
think what would get a lot of officers in trouble is just what you just said, not understanding that you have to swallow this kind of stuff and then you retaliate. And now you're breaking the law to enforce the law in a sense, because you can't stop somebody from expressing themselves.
Right.
We can't break the law to enforce it. If if people are nasty to you with their mouth, then that's just a thing that you have to just deal with. And if you can't deal with it, it's the wrong profession, you know.
Right. You I'm trying to stay on the traffic stop because that's what the focus is. But in my mind, I'm thinking about walking down the street and being detained or asked questions. Um, I think it's the same thing but different. So do the rules apply there? If I'm walking down the street, you and I walking down the street, and a cop just walk up to us and asks us for our ID, doesn't identify themselves, doesn't tell us what's going on. We're just having a conversation.
Right.
Does,
Well, actually, the rules are a little bit more strenuous on that because that's an infringement that is you're not operating a vehicle. You know, there's some case law. I wish I could rattle it off the top of my head there, but I want to say Connor v. Grant, but don't quote me on that. But I do know the specifics behind it is we there are certain elements that we have to prove that the where you are.
Mhm.
We go back to the reasonable. A reasonable person would or would not be there at the given time that you're there. Those are elements that have to be met. And what if what you're doing the same thing a prudent person would do? Because we deal with reasonable suspicion and probable cause and
Yeah,
those type elements to make a case. But when you stop, a stop and frisk is legal per se, but only it's only legal whenever you have a legal right to do so. You know, like if somebody's just walking down the sidewalk, you don't have a legal right to detain them because it goes back. It is a detention. When
right,
you give me
right.
your ID, when I tell you you're not free to go, that is a detention. Same way with the
Yeah,
car. Whenever I have your stuff, your license, your registration, your insurance, you are detained, and we would hope that it was done legally, but literally you're detained and you're not free to go.
okay,
So imagine that. So now we've moved to a more stricter detention because now you're just walking. You
right,
didn't run no stop sign. You know you don't have a tail light that's out. You're walking, and I've detained you. Um, there are some that's an area to where we have to really be make sure that there's some kind of loitering going on, or that there is a some recent break-ins, or
mm,
there's a crime that's going on somewhere else, and maybe I match the description. There cannot be, and people lose their jobs. You know, we had the what was the thing? What was it? Eric Garner, where
mm,
what that officer did was not reasonable. You know what I mean?
right,
I think this brother was selling cigarettes or something that wasn't reasonable. You know, so
right.
these kind of things happen and case laws are turned. Um, it's the same thing with us during the day. No matter what state you live in, these are U.S. laws that somebody has unfortunately violated somebody's constitution somewhere, and now case law is formed, and it gives us the freedoms that we really kind of enjoy. You know,
Mm,
but to say that there are not officers, men and females out here that wouldn't violate that would not be the truth. That's why I go back to one of the first statements that I made, that is that we have to be well versed enough to make
mhm,
sure that we don't. I don't like the mentality of like us versus them. I'm not saying that. Nor am I like a Mister Rogers kid thinking that everybody's getting along. I don't believe that neither. But I do think that we need to educate ourselves enough to where we can remain in compliance. And then if we happen to meet an officer or investigator that have they have a bully mentality, then we
mhm,
can complain and really know what we're talking about. These kind of shows, that's what they're great for. We can kind of help one another. You may have a discipline that I don't have, and I learn something from you. And the whole objective is to stay alive, and we
yeah,
don't want to be we don't want to break the law.
right.
So,
So now the end of the traffic stop. Does a traffic stop end when I am handed back my information? Because I had a situation where the cop pulled me over, and I'm gonna be honest, he was right for pulling me over. The cop pulled me over. I was very compliant. Um, he got my ID, went and looked at my ID. Actually, he didn't even. He looked at my ID, um, and he told me why he pulled me over. I'm trying to remember because it was years ago. He told me why he pulled me over. We talked a little bit about it. He said, "I'm just going to give you a warning. I'm not even going to write this up." He handed me my identification back, and then said, "Where do I know you from?" So he struck up a conversation, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking like the traffic stop is over, or is it? So I don't know. And I'm be honest, after 25 years in the military, I don't just freely give up random information to some even a cop that I don't know this guy. I've never seen him before, but he said he might have seen me. So, when does a traffic stop end?
Very good question, and you're absolutely right. Whenever you have your identification back, your insurance, your registration, the traffic stop is over. Now, little known fact: pull you over for an equipment violation, right? That's
Mm.
what the reason for the traffic stop was. We concluded. How it's supposed to be handled is I go, hey, Mr. Feaster, here's your stuff back. And by the way, you're free to go, but do you have anything in your vehicle that's going to get you in trouble? Anything that's
Right.
that's textbook how that's supposed to go.
Mm.
Legit. I'm supposed to let you know that you're free to go unless there's a dog, unless there's a
Right.
smell of an odor. Then of course we're not going to let you go. But
Right.
if because we're dealing with a reasonable time and because you want to get on the stand and say here's how we did it, that's how it's supposed to be done. So if you're detained any further because you're detained, if you're detained any further, then that is it turns into a illegal detention at that time. If I don't let you know by informing you, not just an expressed or
Mm.
implied, just by verbally informing you that you're free to go, um, then that could run into some problems as far as me breaking the law. But you're all right. Once you have your stuff back, you're free to go. You can pull off, and the officer's talking, however you want to do it. And I would like to think that it wouldn't get to that point, but if
Right.
you wanted to, if you wanted the moment that you had your uh, personal property back, you are free to go.
So, and the reason why I asked this question is because I listened to this one comedian regularly, and he said once he get this, and this is why I got the mentality from. He was like, once I get my e card back, once I get my identification back, the traffic stop is over. So I am not obligated anymore to answer anything. And he said, so if they keep talking, he said his response is, "Thank you, sir, but thank you, ma'am, but I'm actually in a hurry," or something like that, and just kind of like just give that textbook answer until the police officer says, "Okay, have a great day," or walks off, or anything like that. Because in my mind, if the police officer is still talking,
You
I
think
don't
you
have
have
the
to
right
stay.
to just pull off.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually do. If you and I
Oh
would like
wow,
to think that they wouldn't stay there and talk to a car that's pulling off, but maybe that's a case. But once you have your stuff, just I'd say make sure you don't run their toes over, and you can actually you can leave once you have your stuff back.
okay. So we got a question. And the question is, how long is the training period to become an officer? And is there any focus on anti racism in that period of time? I think that's a loaded question. So let me see how you handle that one.
Okay, so again in Florida, um, you have the what is it now? It was OWC Okaloosa Walton College when I went, but it's Northwest Florida
Hmm.
uh, State College. They have a law enforcement academy, and you have two different options. If you go full time, you can do it in about 6 months, and that's Monday through Friday and some Saturdays. So there's hours and hours of training. Now, if you do it a part time to where you work and then you go to school part time, it will take you over a year to complete that. But in the training academy, there are there's training, diversity training, and things that you have to take. But diversity training is even more than just because it's been years. I
Right.
went through the police academy in 2006, I think it was 5 or 6, and even diversity training and a lot of other different domestic violence, just different
Right.
training was
Right.
annually. That's an annual research that you have to take. Patrolling in diverse neighborhoods. Those are some that are annual retrains and that you have to deal with, that you have to take at your individual department. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but it's a continued certification to keep.
And I think that if it didn't answer the question, definitely enlighten some aspects of it, because from a military perspective, there is a lot of annual training that we have to redo.
Right.
that is mandatory so that we can be up on the times,
Right.
or as things have changed and new cases and new policies and new leaders and stuff come out. So yeah, if it didn't answer the question, definitely eluded some insight on some things. So look, this is there's so many more questions I got, but um, the show is only an hour long. But I did get a different perspective on a traffic stop. So I do want to thank you for providing us information. That's why I said that at the beginning. I knew you was going to come in with a plethora of information and shadow us with some good stuff. So thank you for that.
Hey, I
Um,
really appreciate you. You're doing
all
a
right,
great thing, and thank you for having us on and letting us speak for a little bit to your audience. And I hope we've said some things that will kind of give you just a different perspective. From
right,
and my opinions may be different than other people, but I'm really coming from a good place, man. I knew I wanted to be a cop when I was 6, 7 years old, and so I have no regrets there. I've seen different things, but I will, for your audience, the folks that are listening, you'll be surprised if you really could see the hearts of the men and women that do this job. There are some great officers out there. There's
yeah,
some bad ones out there, but the majority are great folks. They want to get home at the end of the night, and they just want to do a good job. So
yeah,
keep them in your prayers.
yeah. I every time I see a traffic stop, I do pray for everybody involved because especially over these last 5 years, there's been a lot of attention of the tension at the traffic stop. So
Sure.
yes, yes, yes. So go ahead and give us any final comments or closing remarks that you would like to give us, and also let the people know if they got any questions for you directly, how to get in contact with you.
Yes. So again, thank you, sir, for having me. The only closing remark that I would have is, and of course, my email is going to be Mr. Feaster will put that up there, but it's Bryan Lewis. There it is, right there, 927 at gmail.com. My only closing remarks is that just get an understanding of whatever it is that we're doing, especially when it comes to the law, especially those of us that are raising children and we have family and friends, get a clear understanding. We have so many biases and things of that nature. We have so many different forces that are pulling our minds and our attentions away from the real issue. And the real issue, we deal with a lot of evil out here, and it is to cause confusion. So I would just advise anyone, no matter what it is, whether it's a traffic stop, whether it's an arrest, anything, just try to get an understanding, get a clear understanding. And if you're wronged or you know somebody that's wrong, my suggestion is always going to be to comply with whatever you can comply with, and then complain. Make a valid complaint, one that's informed, and one that will. We want to seek change. I mean, we're celebrating Black History, and we are. No matter your color, we are Americans, and we're creating history each and every day. So get on the good side of it, and that's how laws are reformed whenever people speak out.
Man, I do appreciate you endowing us with your information. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I know there's a lot of misunderstanding. I know there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of rumors out there, and I just wanted to have somebody come on. I had the lowest perspective last year, and to be honest, like I said, you didn't see the show last year, but to be honest, you have mirrored a lot of what the lawyer said. Of course, coming from a lawyer's perspective, things were said differently, and there was different things that were pointed out. But that makes me feel good that from a lawyer's perspective and a law enforcement's perspective, both of what you were saying were parallel. So thank you for clearing up and shedding some light on some of the confusion at the traffic stop, because at the end of the day, like you said, we're all trying to get home.
That's right.
All right, hold
Thank
on
you.
one second. All right. Hey, I just want to take a few minutes and just let y'all know that the reason for this show is because over the years, there's been a lot of cases, a lot of situations, a lot of news footage that have come out at the traffic stop. And, when we have these discussions about the traffic stop, we say certain things and may or may not understand certain things at the traffic stop. So I wanted to bring, a police officer on here so that we would have a better understanding from a police officer's perspective. And I feel like I have a better understanding. And a couple of the onesies and twosies that I was confused about, he gave me some insight. So I am better prepared at the traffic stop. I know that there are people that have issues with the police, and there are some bad apples in there. And this show was not designed for that. This show was just designed to give us the basics of what's going on at the traffic stop, because the main focus on the news footage is against us in the Black community. So that's why this show was done. And like I said at the beginning of the show, for the remainder of the month, we will deal with issues within the Black community. And today's was the traffic stop. Hey, this was another episode of Let's Talk Family, a bi-weekly show where we discuss issues within the Black community. I am Warren, Mr. Bowtie Feaster, your host, and I love to end the show with my 3 points of interest. One, the center of everything is family. Two, be the best you that you can be. And three, it's called life. Live it. Thank you for tuning in.